If you have a Bible, just want to encourage you to grab that. We're going to be in chapters 4 and 5 as we just continue to work our way through Mark's account of Jesus' life and what he did while he was here on earth. And as we're turning to Mark 4 this morning, as we're looking at this passage, the question I want us to have in mind or to wrestle with is as we look at these kind of snapshots of Jesus' life and what he does in these moments, the question I want us to wrestle with is, what's your response to situations that are out of your control? What's your response when things go crazy, or you feel like you're at wit's end, or things are really, really stressful, or you find yourself in a hopeless, kind of helpless situation? How do you respond when life gets crazy? And maybe some of you, you respond in fear or panic, or you freak out. Maybe some of you just get really tense and maybe take it out on people around you. Maybe some of you just ignore it altogether and you're like, I'm just going to forget that's happening and pretend like this craziness or this chaos doesn't exist. But how do you respond in the middle of chaos? And the reason I want to ask that question is because Mark's going to give us 4 snapshots in Jesus' life where he encounters people in situations that are pretty chaotic, pretty crazy, really stressful situations where the situation in front of them, their circumstances seem helpless, hopeless, and he's going to encourage them in a couple ways. Some are going to respond in fear and panic. Some are going to respond in faith, but his encouragement, what Mark's going to show us, is in the middle of this, Jesus is still in control, and he challenges us to trust him more. And so we're going to pick up in verse 35. If you were here last week, Jesus has just finished teaching parables, and like Jesus does whenever he's done with a parable, he just says, hey, if you got ears, listen, right? If you got ears, use them and hear what I say. And then he just begins to row out into the middle of the sea. And so the disciples, they join him. They're going to get some boats. He's going to kind of leave this place where he's been teaching and go to the other side to Decapolis. And so here's what it says in verse 35. It says, that day when evening came, he said to his disciples, let us go over to the other side. Leaving the crowd behind, they took him along just as he was in the boat. There were also other boats with him. And a furious squall came up, and the waves broke the boat so that it was nearly swamped. Okay, so he's done teaching for the day. He's going to head out in the boat, and we're going to see kind of 3 different miracles that Jesus performs on kind of this boat ride with his disciples. And what we see is he's tired, and in the middle of the night, there's a storm. And so here's what we know about the Sea of Galilee, or where this storm takes place. The Sea of Galilee, it's 700 feet below sea level, and it's just surrounded by mountains. And so one of the mountains that's around the Sea of Galilee is actually 3,500 feet. And so you've got cold air coming down from the mountain, kind of meshing with warm air rising from the sea. And what that creates is a windstorm, okay? Or somewhat of a hurricane. And so there's often windstorms on the Sea of Galilee. It's not a very big sea. Might be more like a lake. It's 13 miles wide and 8 miles long. And so not like a huge, huge sea, but it's known for windstorms. There's just lots of storms on there. In fact, I got to visit the Sea of Galilee several years ago. And in order to cross the Sea of Galilee, we just had to go right at daylight, because later in the day, it gets pretty choppy. And so that's what happens here. And it's a big enough windstorm that it actually catches these seasoned fishermen who are out on the lake all the time. It catches them off guard, and they're kind of in a panic. And so it must have been a pretty crazy storm, a pretty chaotic kind of scene. And so there's water coming up over the boat. It's like the boat is going to sink, and in the middle of all this chaos, in the middle of all this wind, notice where Jesus is, which I find this encouraging. Notice what it says in verse 38. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. And so here's where I can relate to Jesus, and I like this. What does Jesus do after he's done teaching or preaching? He takes a nap. What do most Sunday afternoons? I try to take naps, right? And so here's what I love about this. Anybody good at taking naps? I'm pretty good at taking naps. The next time somebody gives you a hard time for taking a nap, just say, Jesus took naps, so it's all right. And so he's taking a nap. He's worn out. It shows his humanness. And here's what happens when they find him. It says, the disciples woke him and said to him, Teacher, don't you care if we drown? This is interesting. So here's what they're certain of. They're certain they're going to drown. Guess what they're not very certain of? Whether or not Jesus gives a rip. Like whether he cares what's happening, right? And why do they assume that? Because Jesus is sleeping. He's not helping in this moment. Okay, and so it seems like there's chaos. Like it seems like things are way out of control. It seems like they're going to die. They're like, we're going to die. We're going to drown. That's kind of their moment of panic. And their response is, Jesus doesn't care, right? They kind of equate him sleeping or his silence for apathy. They're like, man, he doesn't care. Obviously, he doesn't care because he's asleep. And neither of the things that they're convinced of are true. He does care, and they're not going to drown, right? Like that's the reality of the situation. So in the middle of their circumstance, they respond in fear, and they jump to the conclusion that oftentimes I think we jump to in moments of desperation when Jesus seems silent, and that is, Jesus, do you care? Anybody ever wondered that? Like when things are tough or difficult? I think it's a natural response, like, Jesus, do you care what's going on? And so how does Jesus respond? Notice verse 39. It says, he got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, quiet, be still. And then the wind died down, and it was completely calm. Okay, and so they're freaking out, like, Jesus, do you care? He doesn't respond and say, oh, yes, I care. He responds, he wakes up, and he actually commands the wind. And literally in the Greek, what he says is, stop, like, tells the storm, stop, like, be quiet and stay quiet, right? And so he says, like, hey, be quiet and stay quiet, which is really, really crazy. But even more crazy than that is the wind, right, and the rain, like, it obeys. It'd be one thing, like, if he just had the right timing, and, like, when he said, wind, stop, and, like, it just happened to stop. Like, that was the end of the storm. But for him to say, like, stay quiet, and the whole sea just goes calm, right? Like, waves would have kept on going, maybe for hours, but in that moment, like, it's just completely calm. And the response was they were freaked out by this, which would be honestly weird. Like, imagine this week. How many of you guys enjoyed the weather this week? Wasn't it awesome? It's like really windy, and then there's like hail and snow, and it's like last week it's like high 50s. It seems like spring is coming this week. But just imagine, like, if you're out kind of walking along this week, streets of Baker, it's really windy, and you're with a friend, and he's just like, stop, be warm again. And you'd be like, what? Why? How could anybody talk like that to the weather? And even more weird, or weirder, was the weather responded. And so everything calms down, everything stops, and here's what Jesus says to the disciples. He turns to them and he says, why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith? And what's interesting in this moment, I think sometimes I've heard this kind of story told, and it's like, well, if you just have faith, then Jesus calms the storms in your life. Like, if you just have faith, then he just brings peace to your situations. What's interesting is Jesus calms the storm in spite of their disbelief. Like, they don't have faith in this moment. He challenges them and encourages them to have faith. They're asked why they are afraid. But in this moment, like, they don't have any kind of faith in him being able to stop the storm. And so the question is, like, what kind of faith does Jesus expect them to have, like, in this moment? They have some kind of faith because they followed him, like, they left everything behind. They've seen him heal people. They've seen him cast out demons. And so maybe they have faith that he could do that. They have faith that he's a good teacher. But they've never experienced somebody just, like, commanding nature and it responding, right? Like, this is something they've never seen before. And so Mark is kind of raising the level of Jesus' power, of Jesus' control, that not only does he have the power to cast out demons and heal, but he has the power over nature. And so Jesus asks him, like, why are you still afraid? Do you still have no faith? And I don't think Jesus is angry with them. Like, I don't think he's saying, like, you guys have such little faith. Like, you've seen me do all these things. How come you don't have any faith? But I think it's just an invitation for them to trust him. He just got done telling them about the kingdom of God and the part that they get to play in it, and that he's going to do awesome and amazing things. And so I think Jesus is just saying, like, not only can I heal, not only can I cast out demons, but there's so much more. And when you trust me, like, you have nothing to be afraid of. If you're with me, there's nothing to fear because I'm that powerful. And so he responds and asks them, do you have no faith? And here's their response. I think this is kind of interesting. Their response isn't, okay, we're going to trust you now. Their response isn't, okay, Jesus, like, I'm just handing it over to you. I'm going to trust you with everything because I can't do this on my own, and so I'm just going to trust you, Jesus. That's not their response. Their response isn't, thanks, Jesus, for calming the storm. Their response is, notice in verse 41 what it says. It says they were terrified. Okay, and so earlier in the passage it says they were afraid when they saw the storm, and so, man, they were afraid of the weather. And if you've ever been kind of exposed out in the middle of a storm, like, sometimes that can be really scary. That's one level of fear. But the level of fear they have here is even greater. The word terrified is just like mega afraid. And so they were actually more afraid of Jesus after he rescued them than they were of the storm. Why is that? Because they've never seen power like that, right? Like, they've never seen that kind of authority. And so they ask each other the question, which is a question, if you read through Mark, it's going to show up over and over again, especially in the first 8 chapters, and that is, who is this guy? Like, who is Jesus? That even the wind and the waves obey him. Like, who has that kind of power? Who has that kind of authority? And what does Mark want us to think when he asks that question? Well, he wants us to kind of connect the dots and say, only the Son of God. Only God has the power to actually control nature. And so there were other teachers maybe who could perform miracles or cast out demons, but only God alone could actually command nature. It says this in Psalm 107. It says, then they cried to the Lord in their trouble, and he delivered them from their distress. He made the storms be silent, and the waves of the sea were hushed. And so Jesus, he never performs miracles just like by happenstance. Like, he's very, very intentional in what he's doing. And what he's doing is showing his power over nature so that people would have connected the dots and said, man, this must be God in the flesh. This must be the Son of God. And so he calms the storm, and Mark just kind of leaves that, and they begin to sail on. They cross the sea into Gentile territory. And if I'm a disciple, like, in this moment, I'm thinking, man, who can I tell about this crazy story? Like, Jesus just commanded the wind to stop, and it stopped. And nothing could be more crazy than that until we get to moment number 2, and it's just as crazy and chaotic. And so they're crossing the sea into Gentile territory, and immediately as they approach the shore, there's chaos again. There's this guy who's demon-possessed by a legion of demons. He's naked. He's screaming, right? He lives among the tombs. Nobody will come near this man because nobody has control over him. And so this situation is completely out of control. Nobody's been able to bind this man up. He's been cutting himself. He lives in the tombs. He comes running out to Jesus, and he falls at his feet. And he challenges Jesus, and he's like, what do we have to do with each other? What do you literally have to do with me? And what's interesting is the disciples ask the question, who is this man? Like, after he calms the sea, the demons don't ask that question at all. Notice what the demon calls him or refers to him as. He actually refers to him as the Son of the Lord Most High. And so he knows that he's God. He knows that he's the Son of God, and he is scared of him. He knows Jesus' power, and he knows that he's Yahweh himself. And Mark shows us this to show us that Jesus, he rules the seen world and nature, but he also rules the unseen world. And this man is described as unclean, meaning he's defiled, he's violated, he's lived among dead things in the tomb, he's been abandoned by society. He got into some things that were evil, and because of that, he's uncontrollable. He's actually a harm to himself. It's a really, really desperate situation, and he comes to Jesus. And so we're going to see Jesus not only cast out this demon and heal this man, but we actually get to see his power, and we get to see what he cares about, what he's come to do, and that is to set people in bondage free, to actually bring order out of the chaos. And he's going to show up and show his power over a demon-possessed man that nobody could control, and he sets him free. And he sets him free in an interesting way. There's 2,000 pigs, which that seems like a really big herd of pigs that are on the hillside. And we know that he's in a Gentile region because Jewish people don't raise pigs, right? They don't eat pigs. And so he's in a Gentile region. There's 2,000 pigs, and he just casts the demon into the pigs. They run off a cliff and die, okay? Which is a picture of them actually being destroyed in this moment, that he's being freed from death. And what do we see with the man? Well, his response is a lot different. What we see with the man after the demon leaves is he's clothed, he's in his right mind, right? There's been order brought to the chaos of his life. He's seen Jesus' power, and he wants to go with him. So notice what it says in verse 17. It says, and they began to beg Jesus to depart from the region. And so they're like, man, you've killed enough of our livestock, just get out of here, right? They don't want Jesus around. They have fear of what he's done, but their response to being in amazement is they want him out of here. And as he's getting into the boat, the man who had been possessed with demons begged him that he might be with him. And he did not permit him to do so, but said to him, go home to your friends and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he's had mercy on you. And he went away and began to proclaim in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him, and everyone marveled. Okay, response to the first story, everyone's blown away. The disciples, their minds are blown by the fact that Jesus could calm the storm. What's people's response here? They marveled, their minds are blown by the fact that Jesus could heal this man and cast out a demon that nobody could control. And on a side note, it's really interesting. If you read through the miracles of Jesus, in fact, even the next miracle that we're going to look at, sometimes Jesus will heal somebody and he'll say, hey, keep that quiet. Don't tell anybody at all. Other times, in this moment, he says, you can't come with me, but you know what would be awesome is if you just go tell all your friends about God's mercy and how much he loves them and how the Lord has been good to you. Why the contrast? Well, one of the reasons for the contrast just has to do with location. Where's he at in this moment? Well, he's in a Gentile place where there's no Pharisees, there's no religious leaders who are plotting to kill him in this moment, right? And so they're not going to arrest him, right? None of that's going to happen. And so he says, by all means, just share the goodness of what God has done. And so he commands him to share. And so that's scene number 2. Scene number 3, they get back on the boat. They're going to go back across to the other shore, and we see a different kind of man that comes running towards Jesus, and his name is Jairus. And he's not out of control. He's actually wearing clothes, and he's kind of a prestigious religious leader. He's a leader in the synagogue, which also is interesting because I think a lot of times we think of Pharisees, we think of Sadducees or religious leaders, and we think, oh, they all hated Jesus, they all were against Jesus. That's actually not true. Some of them had faith. And Jairus, he had heard of who Jesus was, and he had faith that Jesus could help him. And so he finds himself in a desperate situation as well. And his desperation is really bad. His daughter is on her deathbed, right? So she's going to die. So, man, imagine what that would be like, and the desperation of knowing this is out of my control. I can't do anything about it, but I've heard about this Jesus. And so he comes to Jesus. His response is the same as the demon-possessed man. He falls at his feet in worship. Like, he falls at his feet because of his power, because of his authority, and he begs him, Jesus, can you heal my daughter? Like, can you heal my little girl? She's about to die. And what's Jesus' response? Well, he says, yeah, I can do that. And so in order for him to do that, there's a lot of people that need healed or that want to be healed. And so wherever Jesus goes, like as we've looked at in the past few chapters, there's a big crowd. So there's this huge crowd that Jesus has to kind of get through to make his way to the house where he could actually heal Jairus' daughter who is sick, who's almost going to die. And so he's making his way there, and we get kind of this awkward conversation. And so what we see is there's a woman who kind of makes her way through the crowd, and she touches his garment. And Jesus, like, he's making his way there, and there's kind of this drama in the story that Mark kind of wants us to realize, where it's like, man, is Jesus going to make it there before Jairus' daughter dies? Like, time is running out. And so he's making his way there, and then all of a sudden, crowd of people, everybody around him, Jesus is like, time out. Somebody touched my robe. And the disciples are like, well, yes, Jesus, you're in a crowd of people. There's a lot of people touching your robe. And he's like, no, like somebody touched my robe. And he stops in this moment to have a conversation that nobody wants to have. Jairus doesn't want to have this conversation. Jairus wants him to get to his daughter so he can heal her before she dies. Actually, the lady who touches his robe doesn't want to have this conversation. We kind of get her backstory, and she's been bleeding for 12 years. And most commentaries think it's like some kind of menstrual bleeding problem that's made her unclean. And so she can't be in contact with Jesus, or that would make her, or would make him unclean. And so she's even taking a risk touching his robe, right? She can't go and worship, and she's been this way for 12 years, kind of an outcast to society because of this condition. And she just thinks, man, if I could just touch a piece of his robe, I know I'd be healed. And so she's got a lot of faith in this moment, but she doesn't want to have this conversation. And as soon as she touches it, she's healed, right? And so it's like, man, can I just like touch it and go, and then you can go and heal this girl who needs healed because she's on her deathbed. But Jesus is like, time out. And he says to her, like, it's not that you touched my robe or touched my garment that healed you. He highlights what's central to all of these stories, and that is, it's your faith. Like, you had faith that you would be healed, and that's why you've been healed. And so he tells her that she has faith, and that's what healed her. He restores dignity and calls her his daughter, right? And so there's this conversation that takes place. And meanwhile, time runs out on Jairus' daughter. And so he heals this woman. He has a conversation, and he uses it as a teachable moment to show that she was healed because of faith. And then his friends come up, and they're like, don't bother bringing Jesus over. Like, your daughter is dead. And imagine like how you'd feel in that moment if you're Jairus, like in that situation. Like, how do you feel towards Jesus? How do you feel about this conversation? Like, imagine if you're a parent in the room and you've got a kid that's on their deathbed, and you rush into the emergency room, right? And you're in the waiting room, and somebody comes in and they've got like a sore hip, or their hip is hurting, right? And the kind of people working at the emergency room are like, we'll go ahead and see this lady first. Her hip looks like it's hurting, and we'll get to you in a moment. And meanwhile, your kid passes away. Like, that would be horrible. Like, you would respond probably in anger, like you would respond in frustration. And so this conversation is had, and the response, I think, from Jairus is like, man, we missed the boat. Like, we missed the timing on this. And what does Jesus do in this moment? Well, he does it on purpose, right? The reason he did it is because he's going to do something nobody's ever seen, right? They've seen him heal people, right? They've seen him cast out demons. Well, now they're actually going to see him bring somebody back from the dead so that his power is seen, so that they can see that he truly is God, that he has power not only over nature, not only over the unseen world, not only power to heal, but he has power to raise from the dead. And so notice what it says, verse 41 of chapter 5. It says, taking her by the hand, he said to her, Talitha Kumi, which means, little girl, I say to you, arise. And immediately the girl got up and began walking. She was 12 years of age. And they were immediately overcome with amazement. And he strictly charged them that no one should know this. And he told them to give her something to eat. Okay, so he heals her. Mark actually gives the words that Jesus said in Aramaic. His readers probably didn't speak Aramaic, but he wanted them to kind of understand and hear the words, the actual words that Jesus would have said in this moment. And I love the humanness of Jesus. Like, in this moment after she's healed, he's like, she's probably hungry. Like, go get her some food. That's his response. And so he heals her. He tells them not to say anything. And what's the crowd's response, or those that witness it? It's the same as when he casts out the demon. It's the same as the disciples when he calms the storm. They're blown away. Like, they're overcome with amazement. He takes her from death to life. They've never seen anything like this. No one has the power to do this. And so why does Mark put these stories together? What should be our response to actually looking at these stories of the amazing things that Jesus did? Well, I think our response should actually be the same as the people who witnessed it. We should be blown away in amazement by the power and the authority of God. And I think sometimes, like, we can read these stories and be like, yeah, we know where that's going. Jesus healed a dead person. He brought her back to life. Jesus calmed the storm. Jesus kind of took control of a situation and cast out a demon out of a crazy man. Of course he did. He's Jesus, right? But imagine if you were there. Like, that would not have been your response. You would have been like, who is this? He must be the Son of God. And if he's big enough and strong enough and powerful enough to command the seas, to bring the dead back from life, or to bring the dead back to life, right? If he's big enough to actually free anyone, no matter where they're at in bondage, then he's powerful enough to actually take care of the chaos in our life, right? That we can trust him. That if he's powerful enough to be in control of those situations that seemed really, really chaotic, then we have nothing to be afraid of. And so the question I think Mark would want to challenge us with is, do you trust him no matter what? Like, whatever the situation is, do you trust that he's powerful enough to take control? Do you also trust that he actually cares, right? The disciples were like, do you even care what's going on? Do we trust that he cares about what's going on in our life? And that even like the woman who comes to him, that our requests are not an interruption to what Jesus is doing, because he loves us and he cares about. And do we trust that he's wise enough to answer in a way that brings glory to him and accomplishes his purpose? I love the way John describes it. Jesus says this in John chapter 16, verse 33. It says, I have said these things to you, that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have tribulation, but take heart, I have overcome the world. Will you pray with me? Father God, as we come this morning, I pray that when we read stories of Jesus and the things that he did, when we study your word, God, that we would always be in awe and amazement of who you are, Jesus, and the power that you have and the authority that you have. And God, I pray that in seeing this, that we would trust you more. That in the middle of maybe seasons or situations in our life that seem chaotic, maybe situations where like, man, it seems hopeless, it seems helpless, I don't know what to do, that our response wouldn't be fear and panic and freaking out, but that our response would be, I'm going to trust the one who's in control, the one who has power over the unseen world and the seen world, the one who commands the waves, the one who can actually bring life from death, and the one who also has the ability to free us from whatever sin and bondage we struggle with in life. And so, Jesus, we're amazed by your power, and we just want to trust you more. So we just pray that you would grow and expand our view of who you are, and that in view of who you are, God, that we wouldn't be afraid of the circumstances we're in, that we would trust in you, that we would look to you for strength, that you would bring peace to wherever we're at. It's in your name we pray. Amen.
Will you guys stand, please? We're going to just close with this song. And I just want to remind you that there will be people up here after the service if you need to talk with someone or pray with someone, or if you haven't put your trust in Jesus and you want to do that today. So. I count on one thing. The same God that never fails will not fail me now. You won't fail me now in the waiting. The same God who's never late is working all things out. You're working all things out. And yes, I will lift you high in the lowest valley. Yes, I will bless your name. And yes, I will sing for joy when my heart is heavy.